Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and it's been a little while, but on today's episode we're going to be covering the cost of the Supercharged build and getting into all the details about it, as well as giving you guys the information if you want to purchase any of the parts that I used on this build. So, stay tuned. Today's episode is brought to you by you. That's right. Every single episode created on Classic Mini DIY is made with the help of our patrons and our long-term part sponsor, 7 Mini Parts. If you want to see more mini stuff and more videos in the future, please consider supporting the channel on patreon.com/Classic Mini DIY, or by checking out some of my awesome merch like t-shirts, stickers, and all sorts of other really cool stuff at merch.classicminidiy.com. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Alrighty, so like I said, today's episode is all about the total cost associated with what I did on my engine, and how you guys can buy the parts that you might need for this project if you want to tackle it. Now, this is something that I have had non-stop questions about. I've never received more questions than I have about how much this whole project has cost me. And a lot of people have this idea that because I'm a YouTuber and because of all of this, I've gotten all these parts for free and it didn't cost me anything. But I want to put that notion completely to bed, because while I did get a few small discounts on a few products, largely I had to purchase all of these products myself. And what I did for you guys is put together a little spreadsheet. That link to that is in my description below. And that is going to have a full breakdown of every product that I purchased specifically for the engine build. I excluded things that were kind of project scope creep. So things like new brakes or interior stuff, things that weren't explicitly related to the engine build itself. I left those items off, and I also included a price to show you guys exactly how much you need in order to just minimally get into this and put a supercharger on your car. Now, like with any big project on a Mini, you can do something as cheaply or as expensively as you want to. Granted, there are kind of some minimums and some maximums on any sort of project. Well, actually, I'd probably argue there isn't much of a maximum on most projects, but there usually is a minimum to get started. Now, on the subject of that minimum cost to get started, I have included a price on that spreadsheet, and it should be popping up right here. That is the minimum cost you would need to get a supercharger on your car with absolutely no additional supplementary parts, and assuming that you are going to be running a Weber setup, so not a fuel-injected setup like I am here. So what that would include is the supercharger itself. This is modified by VMAX, and this will come with the ancillary bits and bobs that you would need to attach it to the side of your car, attach a new pulley, and get it all bolted up to your existing system. Now, the nice thing about these superchargers is that they are largely bolt-on parts with a few caveats. The basic kit to get started would be the one with a decompression plate. That is the plate that goes between the head and your block. And I want to take a minute and talk about these for a second, because a lot of people kind of poo-poo on the idea of a decompression plate. But the thing is, and the fact of the matter is that you can run a decompression plate and it will work just fine. Lots of people only run the decomp plate with 2 head gaskets. You do have an additional point of failure because you are introducing a secondary head gasket. But what that decompression plate does is it reduces the compression, kind of intuitively, yes, I know, inside your cylinders, so that when you increase the boost, aka compress the air more coming into the engine, you don't blow up your engine. Now, that installation is simply removing the head, putting a head gasket back on, your decompression plate, another head gasket, head goes back on, and then you install your supercharger and your Weber on the side here. Now, the Weber is what would replace the sniper unit that I have on my car. And then on the other side, you would get your pulley set up, and that would introduce the multi-web pulley that goes up to the supercharger and drives the actual boost into your car. And then from there, you basically have a supercharged engine. You know, you'll be tuning your Weber, you'll be dialing things in a little bit, but for the most part, that's it. But it's pretty cool that you can get set up with a supercharger on a classic Mini without much effort, and you can get a nice sum of power out of it as well. Some things to consider though, without going the fully built route that I went with this engine, is you're not reinforcing any of the supplementary or complementary parts to the supercharged portion of your engine. So what that means is that your gearbox isn't uprated, you know, your pistons not uprated, so you increase the risk that something might fail, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to fail. A lot of people run stock gearboxes, a lot of people run stock components, stock pistons, everything, and they are fine. There's a term for this called mechanical compassion. So instead of just blitzing the hell out of your gearbox every time you want to, you know, punch it in your car, you might gradually deliver that power instead of just slamming your foot to the floor. And that is just one example of ways to prevent external damage or prevent excessive damage from occurring if you only swap out the supercharger. Now, getting into the topic of some of the extra things that you can start purchasing for this, because you can actually get pretty complex with a build like this. And the build that I did is probably one of the more complex, or at least one of the more complete builds that you might consider doing with one of these superchargers. As you go down the spreadsheet that I have, there are parts about, you know, the pistons, there's parts about the clutch setup, flywheel, the gears I used even in the actual gearbox. And all of these things are built and made and chosen to complement the power that I was aiming for on the supercharger, which for those of you who are curious what the power is, that video will be coming soon. I need to put this on a dyno, but I've not fully set up the charge cooler setup, and I want to maximize the ability to get power out of this engine. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming soon. But that kind of leads me into the kind of additional parts that you can add to an engine like this to make and maximize the power that you're getting out of it. So in my build, I really went, you know, what would be considered maybe balls to the wall. I really picked up every part that I might need for this setup so that I could maximize longevity, increase the strength of the components in here so that I can drive this daily without having any problems. And so some of those things might be, in your situation, and definitely were in my situation, a charge cooler setup. This is what's used to cool the actual inlet manifold here. So there's a plate underneath all of this here, and that is used to channel water through it. This is a secondary radiator, a small computer radiator. This is used to cool the water. This is not fully set up yet. You might notice there's still an open feed here. And I am going to be doing a video on the installation of this so you guys have an idea of how you might want to do that. There are considerations around cooling the engine itself. I have a Mark I Mini, so I have a radiator shroud on the body of the car here, so it limits my ability to upgrade this radiator. This is basically the biggest and nicest radiator I can get, and it's awesome, it's solid, it does what it needs to do, but it does still get a little hot. So ultimately, I probably will be adding a front mount radiator right over here, and we'll be running the coolant. We'll be taking off this hose, and the coolant will run down into that radiator and back out. I'll do a video on that as well. And this will increase my cooling potential here in the US. It gets very hot here. The last few days have been around almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's, 35 degrees Celsius. I have to do the math on that. It'll pop up in the corner with the actual correct adjustment there. But it gets hot here. And boosting your engine is going to increase the heat output of this. So all of the complementary things I'm doing are about reducing the temperature of the engine and making sure it doesn't overheat. Now you guys might have seen in some of the older videos for this build, I did cover replacing the gears with an uprated helical setup or a helical setup, depending on where you're from. That is something that I strongly consider and really recommend doing. You do not need straight cut gears in order to make your engine and your gearbox strong, but you do need to upgrade those gears. So either going with these reinforced helical gears is one good solution, or going with a set of straight cut gears if that's something that you want to do. I am planning to drive this a lot and I don't want it to be loud, so I went with those helical gears. Same thing for the drop gears, and that was a calculated risk on this build. So it is something that you'll want to weigh the pros and cons of how you'll be driving it, and how hard you want to actually push the engine. So I know that while my gears are upgraded, I do still have those helical drop gears, which means that that is a weak point. So when I'm actually punching the car, when I'm driving it quick, these are things that I need to think about while I'm driving it that way so that I don't cause problems. So I could go on and on about this whole build. I can go into every little detail, but I have covered most of this stuff in the prior videos. So I'm not going to bore you guys with that stuff, but I have been asked the question, would I do this build again if I had the choice? And, would I do anything differently? And I would say there are a few parts that I just didn't need. They were kind of added as something I thought I needed, but it ended up being just totally unnecessary. So there's always places like that that are going to pop up where you could have just saved a little bit of money. And I didn't add the parts that I didn't end up using to the spreadsheet that is in the description below, simply because I didn't want to steer you guys to buying those parts because they really weren't something that you need. So to wrap this up, the thing that you guys have probably all joined and gotten into this video for, the total cost that it cost me to do this engine was $8,161.27. That is the amount that I paid. If I didn't have any sort of discounts associated with the channel, with sponsorships, things of that nature, the price would have been $8,628.66. And I would say that is a fair price for a fully built engine with components in it that I know I can trust and know that will last a long time. But like I said at the beginning of this video, you can do this build for a lot less than that. And you can do this build in a lot of different ways, targeting the things that are most important to you on your build, whether it's longevity, reliability, absolute unequivocal brute force strength. There's all things that you can consider and build your engine for. Now, if you guys have any questions about this or any questions about the actual line items on the spreadsheet, I did set it up as a Google spreadsheet, so you guys can post comments on that if you have any questions there, or you can post comments in the description below. I'm going to be answering as many of those as I can. I'll try and get into as much detail as you guys want to have about it. But I would definitely recommend working with Stuart at VMAX. He has been an absolute pleasure to work with, and I can really tell that he is a good, awesome guy. He's not just doing this because I have a YouTube channel or something. He's built kits for much bigger YouTubers than me, and he's definitely been just above and beyond in terms of his support and help on this build. So if you guys are looking to supercharge your car and you want to do a blower style setup, definitely reach out to Stuart. So huge thank you to him. And so that's going to wrap up this episode. But on the next one, we're going to be taking this car to the dyno, or I'm going to be installing a charge cooler. I'm not sure which one I'll do first in terms of filming and editing and everything, but I'll get that installed, I'll get that running, and we can finally get some power figures around this, which is going to be exciting. But until then, post some comments if you have questions, and of course, as always, enjoy those minis and motor on.